We are in week 2 of our series, The Cave, talking about mental health. And last week we talked about you get to that place where you find yourself in the cave, and all of a sudden you start looking back, you start thinking back, and you're like, how did I get here? Like, what did I make decisions, or were there steps? What was it that, and all of a sudden you find yourself in that place, and you want to know the process of how you got to where you're at. And that's what makes mental health issues so difficult, is that we rarely see them coming. You know, I haven't met too many people who are like, man, I better watch out. Just knowing myself, I think I'm highly susceptible to anxiety, and because I'm an extreme people pleaser, and I have an irrational fear of letting people down, and so I know that about myself, and therefore I'm going to set up guardrails, and it's great if you have that kind of self-awareness. Most of us don't, okay? And so most of us don't see it until it's already there. And for the rest of us, we find ourselves unprepared because we're in this location, we're in this state of mind, we're in this place in our lives, this cave, that we never thought that we'd be in. Satan wants nothing more than to knock you out. And what better way to do that than using psychological warfare? To have us so distracted, so busy trying to free ourselves from this cave that doesn't even have a door, that we've been taken out of the fight against everything else. We have to remember that we are his enemy. You and I are his enemy, and he wants to destroy us from within. Jesus has come that you may have abundant life. Like, do you realize that he wants you to have abundant life? You know, when Jesus in the Bible, when he was going with people, like, he didn't, walk up to a lame person like, legs are overrated anyways. Like, I think you'll be fine without that. He didn't go to a person who had boils and like, I heard aloe is really good for like soothing that, No, he went and he healed these people. He did whatever he could to see these people freed from sin, from death, from disease. And that's what God wants for you. God is not this doctor where he wants to like cope and help you cope and kind of coast through life and like, hey, let's manage these symptoms that you're having. And no, God is like a surgeon. Like, he comes in and he's like, we're going to cut this stuff out, and he wants to see you transformed. He doesn't want to see you limping along or coping along with these different things. He wants you to help find freedom. A few years ago, there was a rash of pastoral suicides, and I didn't know any of them personally, but these were pastors of fruitful ministries. That stuff seemingly on the outside was going well. Their churches seemed like they were healthy and they were growing and ministry was happening. And yet, while that was happening, they felt so depressed that they felt that they needed to take their lives because they thought that seemed like the best course of action or the only course of action. They were trapped. Mental illness is not contained to a small group of people. There's not like a specific demographic where it's like, oh, it affects those people, but doesn't affect anyone else. Any of us could face mental health issues. And so it's important that we guard the health of our mind in the same way that we would guard and invest in the health of our bodies. We need to take it seriously. And so these were successful pastors. They were helping people, but they were caught in a prison. They didn't feel like they could be honest or reach out to other people about what was going on with their mental health, especially due to the stigmas that surround it. Your mind is a battlefield. When you're having a toxic thought, a thought that is not obedient to the truth that Christ has told us about, we need to recognize it and we need to replace it. Many of you have struggled with mental health issues like I have in the past, and you're going to be able to maybe more readily identify with the things that I'm talking about. But for those of you that have not, and I hope that you never do, I want to illustrate a little bit about some of the walks and the issues that I've gone through to help you understand what it's like. And it's important, if there was a skill for us as a church to work on, it's empathy. And empathy is very different than sympathy. Sympathy usually comes from a place where you're kind of above someone else, and you're like looking down, and you're like, I'm glad I'm not them. I feel sorry for you, but I'm really glad that you're there and I'm not there, and you feel bad, and it doesn't go any further than that. Empathy is where you get down on their level, and you try to understand what it is that they're going through. And you can see that we have an entire lack of empathy in our country, because what we do and what our country does is when someone disagrees, okay, we all of a sudden jump into this like fight or flight mode. And all of a sudden, we're canceling this person, we're cutting this person out of our lives. You disagree with me on this, you disagree with me on that. And we're not trying to get down to their level and trying to understand, say, interesting, I got a different perspective. I would really like to understand yours because I want to know how you got to that place. It's really important that we empathize with people. So I was pretty OCD as a kid. It was something that I never went to the doctor. I never got the diagnosis. I did a pretty good job of hiding it. But as I'll illustrate in a sec, I had some behaviors that were not normal. I'm going to have Mitch come up and help me. Mitch, you in here? I told him about it this morning. He was pretty hesitant. Mitch was like, I don't know if I want to be your helper here. But so I had these behaviors, and even as a young kid, I recognized that these behaviors were not normal. And as a kid, when you have a behavior that's not normal, and you might be embarrassed about, what do? You hide it, And so I did a pretty good job of hiding these different behaviors that I have. And so the way that my OCD came about is, or the way that I kind of acted it out, is something would become dirty or tainted. And then I would have to go through this process that my mind made up to then make that thing no longer tainted. So I'll give you an example. Mitch, come on up. He was back there because he didn't want to be used as an example. How many of you played with Legos as a kid? Okay, so I loved Legos, and for some reason, you're going to be the sink, okay, right there. Okay, thumbs up, because that's hot, that's cold. And these Legos would become dirty for some reason. I can't tell you why. And so I would have to go through this process. I'd have to get a rag. I'd have to get the rag wet with some warm water, and I have to clean out every single square inch of the sink in like this circular process. And then I'd take that out, and then I'd fill it with water. And then I would have these Legos, and the thing is, one of the Legos would be dirty, and I wouldn't know which Lego it was. So the only safe thing to do would be to quarantine all the Legos. All the Legos had to go through this process. And so I'd take each Lego individually, and then I would dip it in the water. But I couldn't touch any of the sides of the sink. If I did, I would have to restart the entire process. Now, how many of you know that Legos, you don't have like 2 or 3 or 10? You have like thousands of Legos, and I had a lot of Legos. And so I'd go through this process, and I would dip each one individually, and then I'd set it on a clean towel to dry. And that would be the process that I would have to go through. So every time my Legos became tainted, do you see the prison that I was in? And that I would have to go through this ridiculous process, and yet that's what I needed to do to be able to feel like I could play with my Legos again. Another example, and this is a pretty funny one because I remember this specific scenario. So another way, you're now a shelf. Okay? I'm at the store. I could never take something from the front of the shelf. Because again, that thing was tainted. It was dirty. My mind wouldn't allow me to do it. And so clothes, soup cans, whatever it was. Now, over the course of time, I realized that this was unhealthy thinking. I recognized my behavior, and I would have conversations with God of, God, I don't want to be this way, and I'm not going to let these irrational fears keep me in this place. And that's what a lot of mental health issues do. It'll convince you, okay, that the cave is actually a safer place to be in. And it'll say, yeah, I know it's dark in here and there's some negative things, but you have no idea what it's going to be like out there. And so all of a sudden, your own mind and or the enemy begins convincing you to stay in the cave. And I decided, even at a young age, I don't want to be in this cave anymore. I'm going to break free. And I know that I need to start making choices that differ from what my mind is telling me. And so I went to the store, and I pumped myself up because I knew that today was the day that I was going to fight against this compulsion that I had of having to take something from the back. And so I intentionally went in, and I was like, I'm going to take something from the front, okay? And so I went and got a can of soup. I got that can of soup, and I went to reach for it. My hand was like a little bit shaky, like, okay, but I'm going to do it. And so I walk away, I got this smile on my face, and I freeze. I kind of turn around, I'm like, nope, I got to make myself do this. Nope. And I do it a couple of times. And so then I go and do my other shopping, and I find myself walking back to this exact same shelf. And like, there's always tomorrow. I can always start this tomorrow. And I'm trying to talk myself out of it. And then I decide, nope, I need to walk through with it. Okay, I need to follow this through. And so I take the soup, I go to the cash register, and my mind is screaming like, don't do it. And I decide, I need to do it. And so I buy the soup. Thank you. You were a great shelf and sink. You're good. And so I bring the soup, I buy the soup, and I go to my car, and I put the soup in my trunk because I want to be as far away from this dirty soup from the front row as possible. And so I begin driving home, and again, my mind is just like, you're making a mistake. You don't know what you're doing. And I get home, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to make this soup. So I make the soup, and every single bite I take, my body's like, you're poisoning yourself. You're poisoning yourself. And so I'm eating this soup, and finally I get to the end, and guess what happened? Nothing. Okay? Absolutely nothing. Of course I wasn't poisoned because this is a figment of my imagination. And all of a sudden, it was like this relief came over me, and I was like, I'm alive. And I moved into high school, college, and I really struggled with anxiety at times. Anyone ever struggled with anxiety? You can admit it. Just raise your hand. If it's not like half the people in this room, we've got liars. And but anyways, anxiety feels like being in this fight or flight mode constantly. You're never able to stop overthinking, over-analyzing, over-worrying, and it lets your thoughts run your life. It's this out-of-control feeling where you're extremely nervous, but you don't know why or what about. And I remember battling those thoughts and recognizing them and deciding I did not want them. And so I would read and I would meditate on Philippians 4:6, which says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And through the years, God's taught me that gratitude is actually the best antidote to anxiety. Because anxiety, what it really is, it is fear of the unknown. Whereas gratitude is thankfulness of the known. Anxiety is this fear of the future and what could happen. Gratitude makes us present in the here and now. Later in college, I went through a bout of seasonal depression. No joke, I found it out while in psychology class. If you haven't gone through something and you're going through it for the first time, a lot of times you know something's up. Like you know something's weird, but you don't really know how to identify it because you don't have the experience to be able to say, oh, now I know what I'm going through. And so I knew that something was up. I just didn't know what it was. So we're going through depression in my psychology class. And he's going through the symptoms of seasonal depression. And my mind's just going like, check, 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 as he was going through all the symptoms. And so I kid you not, class got over. I met with my professor, and I was like, hey, can we kind of meet in private? And he's like, sure. And I sat down, and I was like, hey, I'm depressed. And he's like, what? I was like, yeah, I just found out. I said, I've never studied depression at all, and I'm not making this up. And so he got me hooked up with the school counselor, the therapist there, and we worked through it, and it was really good. The biggest war you're ever going to face is going to be the war within yourself. And I remember when I was going through that time of depression, I started choosing thoughts that counteracted how I felt. You see, because I would be lying in bed completely apathetic to life, which is very opposite of my nature. I'm not a reserved, apathetic type of person. And I would just want to lay there all day. And regardless of how I felt, I would force myself to think, you know what? Your brain isn't being honest right now. You do care about life. You do want to hang out with friends. You don't want to lay in bed all day. You do have a purpose. And so it was this battlefield of the mind. Don't give your thoughts free rein. Make them obedient to the way that God intended you to think. And I want to encourage you, if you've given up today, then today is your opportunity to start fighting again. Recognize your thoughts and replace them when necessary. Elijah. Last week we talked about when Elijah went toe-to-toe with the prophets of Baal. Does anybody else think that he looks like Doctor Strange? For any of you Marvel fans, I'm just throwing that out there. But he stood toe-to-toe with the prophets of Baal in the face of 200 of them. He stood strong as God sent fire from heaven to consume the sacrifice in front of everyone. And following these two great spiritual victories, the enemy attacked him. And so he called fire from heaven. God sends fire, burns everything up. He ends a 3-year drought. And you would think that he would be on this adrenaline high. Like, Nothing can touch me, unless God says so. If God's for me, who could be against me? God's my rock. I've got nothing to fear. And then Jezebel throws this threat. She kind of like plants this seed in Elijah, and she doesn't even do it herself. She sends a messenger, and she says, "May my gods deal with you with me ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I don't make your life like one of my prophets you killed." Now, do you realize that fear only has an effect if you accept it? Like when that seed is planted, you have a choice whether to allow it to remain planted or you can dig it up and make sure that it's removed. Elijah could have said, I think I'm good. Like, I think God proved himself. I'm not too worried. Go ahead, send your best. And instead, he allows that threat to become his reality, and he runs. And 3 days later, he wants to end his life. 1 Kings 19, verse 5. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." Next one. Keep going. There we go. He looked around, and by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. Now it's interesting seeing God's response to Elijah in this moment. God sends an angel, and the angel doesn't come and attack him. He doesn't come and say, "Elijah, where's your faith? Elijah, why are you running? Elijah, why are you being such a weak man? Stand up." He doesn't do that, does he? Instead, the angel ministers to him. Like he takes a nap, and he wakes up, and there's food there. Not once, but twice. Okay, Elijah gets door dashed 2 times. God didn't rebuke him for running. And I think sometimes we have this tendency when we are in this cave, this mental cave, and we feel guilty because we know that we're not healthy, and all of a sudden we view God as someone who's angry at us. God isn't angry at you because you're in this mental cave. He doesn't want you there. He wants to show you the steps. He wants to lead you out of there, but he's not mad because you're in that place. And the angel, he didn't attend to his spiritual needs first for Elijah. He met his physical needs first. We're made in 3 parts, body, soul, and spirit. And balance occurs when we recognize that all 3 of these needs must be met. Your physical action or inaction is going to affect your mental state. Your physical and your mental state is going to affect your spiritual life. And so we take steps. We take steps into a needed recovery. There was this pastor's son, and he had kidney failure. And so he was on dialysis like 3 times a week. If you don't know what your kidneys do, they basically filter out the toxins. They get rid of the stuff that's bad for your body. And during this time, as he's going on dialysis multiple times a week over the course of several years, he's on a kidney transplant list because that's what they need. They need a healthy kidney so they don't have to do dialysis anymore, and the kidney can do its job. And so finally, after years of waiting, they get the call. And if you don't know what it's like for that, when you get the call, everything in life pauses. Like everything stops. You stop whatever you're doing. You get on the first flight possible. You go to the hospital. They do the tests, and then they bring you straight into surgery. And so they get to the hospital. They go through the tests, and the doctor comes and says, "I'm so sorry, but we can't go through with the surgery." And they're shocked. They're like, "What? Why in the world? We've been waiting years for this. Like, why would we not?" And he said there's still too many toxins in his body. He needs way more dialysis to deal with it. If we put the healthy kidney in now, the body's going to reject it. They didn't want to put the solution in the body and have the unhealthy body reject the solution. I wonder how many times God wants to do something in us. We hear a sermon, we read a book, we get a word from someone, we go through a counseling session, we hear something that is the solution, but we're too unhealthy to actually receive that solution. The solutions are around us, and instead, we're so unhealthy that we're just rejecting the very things that are going to bring us life. The angel said to Elijah, before we begin the procedure, before we bring you to this next stage, I need you to take a nap. I need you to eat. I need you to drink. I need you to take another nap and repeat the process because we need to get you physically healthy so we can bring you into this new assignment, this new stage. Rest is the frequency that God speaks through. And Satan will work to keep you from that frequency. And so there's solutions all around us. The answers are there, but they haven't worked because you haven't gotten yourself healthy enough to receive them. And so you're probably thinking, well, then how do I do that? Am I a lost cause? Because there's kind of this like catch-22 of I need this solution, but you're saying if I'm not healthy enough to receive the solution, you do what you can, and it starts slow. You go one step at a time. And I know it's hard, but you are responsible for getting your life back in order. You are responsible for your calendar. You are responsible for the life that you live. If you're trying to live over your limits with this, like we were just like two handfuls constantly, never taking time to rest, you're always moving past the stage of tiredness into exhaustion. We weren't designed for nonstop activity. And we need to quit wearing busyness as this badge of honor, where, you ask someone how they're doing, oh, I'm so busy, because it makes us feel important. It pumps us up, and so we tell everyone how busy we are as if it's a good thing. It's killing us. If I don't prioritize my life, somebody else will. You realize that there's more than enough people willing to prioritize your life if you don't prioritize it. Your spouse, your kids, your friends, your boss. Okay, there's more than enough people where if you don't put in those guardrails yourself, if you don't figure out what margin looks like in your life, everybody else will eat up that time. If you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. Psalm 90:12 says, teach us to number our days and recognize how few they are. Help us to spend them as we should. How do you steward your days? Don't work on Sundays. Implement a Sabbath. Follow the principle that God modeled for us. Let Sundays be a day of recovery. Slow down. Don't give up on the things that build you up, that energize you, that feed you. That's our tendency. When we get busy, we cut out the most important things. We let urgent stuff replace the important stuff. And you hear it all the time. People, I'm too busy to work out. I'm too busy to cook, and so that's why I'm, getting fast food every time. I'm too busy to take a vacation. I got too much stuff to do. And it's all these different excuses. And the thing is, you're the one who has to take control of your schedule and to figure out what healthiness looks like. So Elijah, 1 Kings 19:9. There he went into a cave and spent the night. And the word of the Lord came to him. What are you doing here, Elijah? He replied, I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I'm the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me too. The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. And then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. Do we need any more proof that Earth, Wind, and Fire is one of the best bands of all time? Sometimes we need to get the revelation that standing in the presence of God is far more powerful than sitting in the presence of therapists. Therapy is great. It can be very enlightening, but the presence of God is transforming. And so we as a church, we as Christians, we need to step into a God encounter. That's why God says, be still and know that I'm God. And here's the thing. You might say, yeah, that's great. I accept that. Great point. But you can say that in here, but then as you walk out these doors, what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to pull your phone out and you're going to check it. You're going to get in your car and you're going to turn on the radio. You're going to check your phone again. You're going to get home and you're going to turn on the TV. All is as a distraction because you are uncomfortable with the silent moments. Because the silent moments are when we experience God, and it's also when we experience our true selves with all of our imperfections and all of our insecurities. And sometimes there's a part of us that is afraid of who we are, and we're also afraid of who God is and the relationship or maybe lack of relationship. And so we're like, if I ever slow down for just 5 minutes, I don't know if I'm going to like what I see. You slow down enough to hear the whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled the cloak over his face, and he went out and he stood at the mouth of the cave. And then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I'm the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." It's interesting that he covers his face. The face is what identifies us physically more than anything else. And he was at this point where he was ashamed. He had lost his confidence. He was in this place of despair, all because of this comment sent through a messenger from Jezebel that he allowed to turn into fear. And then this is what God said to him. The Lord said to him, "Go back the way you came, and go to the desert of Damascus. And when you get there, anoint Hazael king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu son of Nimshi king over Israel. And anoint Elisha son of Shaphat from Abel Meholah to succeed you as prophet. Jehu will put to death any who escape the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death any who escape the sword of Jehu. Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all those knees have not bowed down to Baal, and whose mouths have not kissed him." When you choose isolation, you will lose. Do you realize how Elijah has convinced himself that he's the only one left? God, I'm the only one. I'm the only one who's still serving you. I'm the only one who hasn't done this. And now everyone's trying to kill me. And God's like, I got 7,000 others. If you isolate, you will lose. You know what I want Bethel's Rock Church to be? I want it to be a place where people come in and they share exactly what they're going through. They're just honest. Here's where I'm at. Here's what I'm struggling with. And they're met with this response. You too? You too? I'm going through that exact same thing. And all of a sudden, what do? They live out that issue together. They walk through that issue together. It's significant that God said, "Go back the way that you came." It was called the place of the oath. On the surface, it doesn't mean much to most people, but the way that he came was through Beersheba, and Beersheba was called the place of the oath. And it's the place where he would have said, "I will give you my life no matter what. I am a servant of God." Elijah was stepping into a new assignment, and we all need an assignment as well. If you're waking up every day and your goal is just to, hey, I need to pay the bills so I can self-exist, you're going to end up in a cave if you're not there already. But if you know what your life means and you're doing something to impact eternity and people, it is something that is going to drive you. It is something that is going to pull you out of that cave. It is something that is going to give you fulfillment and purpose. There's something called logotherapy. A Jewish psychiatrist, Viktor Frankl, came up with it. He wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning. I highly recommend it. He was a psychiatrist before. Him and his family, they were arrested, thrown into prison camps. All of his family died during this process. He barely survived. He was literally starved to death, as well as all the work and torture that they put upon him. And he lived through it. And post-World War II, he worked in a clinic in Austria to treat the Holocaust victims who survived. And something he noticed is that every single one of his patients were suicidal. And there was another famous psychiatrist at this time, Freud, and Freud believed that the goal of life was pleasure. Frankl believed that the goal of life was purpose and meaning. And he said if you don't have that purpose and meaning, it doesn't matter how much pleasure you have, it's just dulling a void that you can never fill. And so you're always going to need higher forms and more pleasure to try to get to that point. And he said it's just going to be this self-defeating spiral because you're seeking after the wrong thing. You're going after something that's not actually going to help you. And so Viktor Frankl believed that the real way to find happiness and the way that pleasure actually became enjoyable was when it was tied to purpose. Do you realize that your life matters, that you have an identity? You're not just this evolutionary accident. And so there's three things that Frankl created that he taught and that he worked with his patients on that he said we all need. Number one, we need creative value. Helping someone find meaningful work. And this is why the Bible says that we are a body, that we are supposed to serve one another. Number two, experiential value, receiving something from the world through appreciation and gratitude. by fully experiencing something or loving someone. Again, it is this idea of rooting ourselves in the moment. Instead of being drawn into the future of what worry might look like or what the past defined us as, instead we say, I'm going to live in the moment here and now. And lastly, attitudinal value. We adopt a certain attitude towards inevitable suffering, accepting that pain and suffering is a part of a broken world and that every person is going to be hurt by something. Frankl said this: people have enough to live by, but nothing to live for. They have the means, but no meaning. And there was a Bible character besides Victor. If you want to talk about a person with a reason to complain, let's talk about Paul. He really had some horrible experience in his life. 5 times he received 39 lashes. He was put in prison. He was shipwrecked. He was snake bitten. He was stoned. You're like, well, at least he had some relief to all that pain. Not that kind of stoned. And yet he said this. Took you a sec on that one. He says this: therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. And so we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. How is this possible? Because Paul was living for something bigger than himself. There's a quote I saw the other day about Paul, and it says, when Paul wanted to encourage Christians, he did not say that their breakthrough was around the corner. He helped them make sense of their suffering in light of the coming reign of Christ. He said, if we suffer with him, we reign with him. And you can see this play out, the psychology of it, even with a kid, okay? A kid runs into a wall. Toddlers, their ratio of their head to their body is so mismatched. And they've hit a wall and they're crying, and all you have to do is you say, you want a popsicle? And the tears go away right away, and they're like, yeah. Why? The pain didn't just didn't just disappear out of nowhere. No, all of a sudden you gave them something that had more meaning to them. They said, I care way more about the popsicle than I do my pain. They were drawn to something bigger, something that they wanted more. So how do you step out of the cave? Specifically in regards to depression, I feel like that this is a word that I was supposed to include. You get out of the cave by focusing on more than yourself. You're not going to self-help your way out. You won't self-care your way out. Those have a tendency to provide momentary relief inside the cave. But you need to engage in something that is bigger than your problem, something outside of the cave. 1 Kings 19:19. So Elijah went from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah went up, and he threw his cloak around him. Elijah didn't say, hey, I've got enough of my own problems to deal with. I'm just going to focus on me. No, instead he said, I'm going to invest in someone else. I'm going to invest into the next generation. We need rest, we need care, but if we become inwardly focused only, we're going to be consumed by our own problems, our own issues. One of the most important things you can do for your own health is to begin investing in someone and something else of value. We have a thriving kids ministry here at Bethel's Rock. You want to make one of the biggest investments you've ever made, then go talk to Pastor McKenzie after this service. Say, I want to become a kids leader. I want to make a difference. I want to be a part of raising up the next generation. I want to be a part of sharing God with them and helping build that foundation at an early age. We step into relational strength as well. Like I said, when you isolate, you lose. Don't go at it alone. We need people. We need friends. And if you're like, I don't know who that person is, stop waiting for someone to reach out to you. You make the uncomfortable first move to begin reaching out to other people. Get into a small group. Pastor Molly's here, our life group pastor. We've got like 55 different life groups that meet on all different nights and mornings of the week and have all different kind of locations. It is up to you to make that uncomfortable step to find a community and intentionally place yourself there. Kevin Eikenberry said this, look carefully at the closest associations in your life, for that is the direction that you're headed. Prayer team and worship team, you can come on up. Do you realize that you have everything that you need? You have the transforming presence of God. You've got Christians, brothers and sisters. You've got mentors. You've got friends. You've got pastors, all who love you and want to help walk with you out of the cave. Your depression, your anxiety, your eating disorder, those are not things that define you. That is not your identity. But you have to step into the light. And so as we worship, come and get prayer. Come and kneel at the altar. Worship where you're at. But I want this to be a defining moment in your life where you begin stepping out of that cave. You don't stay in the place where you're at. You don't accept that this is just who I am, that this is just what I deal with, but instead that you would allow God and allow other people in this room to help walk with you out of that cave. So can we stand right now?